The buzz of my phone cut through the silence like a siren in the night. Meet me tomorrow, art and coffee? The message from Mark, a guy I bumped into at the gallery last week, flashed across the screen. My husband, buried in his work across the room, didn't even glance up. That's how it started, simple enough, a little excitement in my otherwise predictable days. Mark and I hit it off over our shared love for abstract art and disdain for early mornings. It was innocent, or so I told myself. Coffee dates turned into long walks, our conversations meandering like the paths we strolled. It felt good to be seen, really seen, by someone again. One night, by the riverside, the city's lights reflecting off the water, Mark's hand found mine. I didn't pull away. The gap my husband's career had wedged between us seemed to widen, and in a moment of weakness, I leaned into Mark. The kiss was a spark in the dry tinder of my neglected heart. Juggling two lives became my new norm. I mastered the art of deception, my schedule a carefully orchestrated symphony of lies. The thrill of it was intoxicating, an adrenaline rush that kept me coming back for more. Mark started sending gifts, small tokens of affection, each one a secret I kept locked away in my drawer. They were evidence of my betrayal, but also of my existence outside the role of a neglected wife. I told my husband I was going on a business trip, a weekend getaway with Mark. The guilt knotted me, but the excitement of being with someone who wanted me, truly wanted me, was too much to resist. At dinner one evening, I watched my husband, lost in his thoughts. He seemed so distant, a stranger in the home we shared. I convinced myself he didn't notice my absences, my late returns home smelling faintly of another man's cologne. It was as if I was invisible to him, or maybe I wished I was, to ease the guilt of my betrayal. That's how I found myself living a double life, caught between the stability of my marriage and the exhilarating unknown with Mark. The excitement of the affair blinded me to the inevitable consequences, a ticking time bomb I was too caught up to defuse. Just grabbing lunch with a colleague, I lied smoothly, my heart racing as I spotted Jenna from across the crowded restaurant. She was here, in the same distant city where I was supposed to be on a solo business trip. The sight of her nearly choked me with panic. Later, when she quizzed me about running into me, I laughed it off, saying, "Small world, huh?" But inside, I was fraying at the edges, wondering how long I could keep this up. Mark's whispers of forever started to seep into our stolen moments, his words painting a future I hadn't dared to imagine. "Why not leave him, be with me," he'd murmur, each word a seductive challenge to the vows I'd made. I found myself caught in a dangerous tide, comparing the man I'd married to the one enticing me with whispered promises of passion and excitement. Mark made me feel alive, wanted, and seen, emotions I hadn't associated with my husband in years. The creation of a secret email was a calculated move, a further step into the abyss of my affair. It felt like setting up a residence in a land I was only supposed to visit. This digital line of communication was our secret tunnel, hidden away from the prying eyes of the world I was lying to. One night, as we drifted further into an argument about the growing distance between us, I found myself silently accusing my husband of driving me into another man's arms. "If only you'd noticed me," I thought bitterly, even as I argued about feeling neglected and misunderstood. His work had become his mistress, leaving me to seek solace in the arms of another. His late returns became more frequent, his explanations more rehearsed. "Work's been crazy," he'd say, but all I heard was, "I don't have time for you." It was easier to interpret his absences as indifference rather than confront the reality of our crumbling relationship. Each night he came home late, I felt vindicated in my actions, as if his neglect excused my betrayal. The weekend at the beach resort with Mark was a dream wrapped in the soft hues of sunrise and sunset. It was a world away from reality, where the only decision we had to make was whether to spend the day by the ocean or lounging in bed. It was during this getaway that I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't step back over. The intimacy and connection we shared were unlike anything I'd experienced before, marking a definitive point of no return in my affair with Mark. Each of these actions, driven by a mix of desperation, desire, and defiance, wove a complicated web I was entangled in. The thrill of new love with Mark juxtaposed sharply against the stability, and now, the monotony, of my marriage. Caught in the throes of an affair that was becoming more real by the day, I was forced to confront the inevitable question. Could I really leave my husband for a future uncertain, yet intoxicatingly inviting? The moment Mark slipped the necklace around my neck, it felt like a brand burned into my skin, a gorgeous, glittering symbol of my betrayal. Hidden beneath my clothes, it was a constant reminder of the double life I was leading. It felt like carrying a secret token of an alternate universe where I was bold, reckless, and utterly alive. Lying in bed next to my husband, I'd find myself tracing the outline of the jewelry, my mind wandering to a future with Mark. A future where every morning didn't start with a silent breakfast and every night didn't end with us turning our backs to each other in bed. I dreamed of laughter, shared secrets, and mornings waking up tangled in sheets in each other's arms. It was a seductive fantasy, one that made the reality of my marriage seem even more stark and unbearable. But guilt has a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. Watching my husband sleep one night, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the faint furrow between his brows even in sleep, I was overwhelmed by a wave of remorse. The realization of the depth of my betrayal hit me hard. Here was a man who had shared his life with me, and I was tearing that life apart, piece by piece. The doubts started to seep in during a heated discussion with Mark about where we were headed. His words, once a balm to my restless soul, now sounded hollow. "Let's not rush things," he said, his commitment phobia suddenly in sharp focus. That reluctance, that hesitation, was a cold splash of reality on my fantasy. Was I really ready to upend my life for someone who couldn't promise me tomorrow? Then came the day I overheard my husband laughing on a call. That sound, so rare and genuine, cut through me. Jealousy flared up, not for another woman, but for whoever was on the other end of that line, sharing a moment of joy with the man I was betraying. It was a stark reminder of what we used to have, of what I was throwing away. I made up my mind to confess. "I need to tell you something," I began, the weight of those words heavy in the air between us. His reaction was a punch to the gut, silent devastation. No accusations, no anger, just a quiet, "I need some time to think." That silence was worse than any argument. It was the sound of his love for me, cracking under the weight of my deceit. Left alone with my thoughts, I was engulfed by suspense and regret. The waiting was excruciating, every minute stretching out endlessly. I had laid my cards on the table, betting everything on his love being strong enough to forgive me. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gambled away the best thing I ever had, all for a fleeting fantasy. The morning I caught my husband flipping through our credit card statements with a furrowed brow was the moment I knew the jig was up. "Strange expenses," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I could feel the walls closing in, each statement a breadcrumb leading back to my guilt. When he finally confronted me, it wasn't with anger but with a stack of printouts and a look of betrayal. "Can you explain this?" he asked, his voice steady but his hands shaking. The emails, the receipts, the hotel bookings, they laid bare the truth I'd been hiding. I crumbled, the weight of my secrets too heavy to bear any longer. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I lost my way." His response wasn't a raging storm but a quiet withdrawal, a retreat into a shell where I could no longer reach him. He threw himself into work, into social events, anywhere but home. The silence between us grew, a chasm filled with unsaid words and unshed tears. Then, I noticed the changes. The late nights, the secretive smiles at his phone, the sudden interest in his appearance. Was he having an affair too? The thought knotted me, a cruel twist of fate. I confronted him, jealousy and fear making my voice tremble. "Are you seeing someone?" His evasive gaze was all the answer I needed. Desperate for some semblance of what we had, I turned to Mark, seeking solace, or perhaps a way to wield the same hurt. But Mark's confession that he wasn't looking for exclusivity, that he was seeing other women, hit me like a freight train. "I thought we had something special," I whispered, my voice breaking with the realization of my naivety. Alone and adrift, the reality of my choices crashed down on me. My husband, my safety net, was pulling away, and Mark, the man I risked it all for, was just a mirage. In a last-ditch effort, I suggested counseling to my husband, clinging to the hope of reconciliation. His non-committal shrug was a dagger to my heart. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew. I watched, helpless, as my husband started to untangle our lives, moving his belongings out bit by bit. The man I vowed to spend my life with was preparing to walk away, and the enormity of my actions, the betrayal, and the lies, settled in. I was losing him, not to another woman, but to the chasm my infidelity had created. As I sat alone in the echoing silence of our once shared home, the weight of my decisions bore down on me. The future I had envisioned, with either man, had dissolved, leaving me to grapple with the consequences of my actions and the realization that I had dismantled the very foundation of my life. The moment I decided to leave Mark, it felt like waking up from a dream, a fog lifting, revealing the stark reality of my choices. His indifferent shrug when I told him we were done, that I needed to fix my marriage, hit me harder than I expected. Sure. Do what you need to, he said, already texting someone else. That's when it sank in. I was just another name in his long list of conquests, a temporary escape from boredom. I turned my focus to my husband, trying to bridge the chasm I'd created between us. I started with small things, leaving notes in his laptop bag, cooking his favorite meals, trying to ignite a spark of what we used to have. But each attempt felt like throwing pebbles into an abyss, waiting in vain for an echo. After weeks of silence, he finally agreed to meet me for dinner. I dressed carefully, choosing the blue dress he once said reminded him of our first date. I was nervous, rehearsing apologies, promises, anything that might make him see the remorse eating at me. Sitting across from him at our favorite restaurant, I poured my heart out, tears mingling with the wine. I'm so sorry, I was lost, and I've realized how much I've hurt you, how much I've hurt us. Please, can we try again? His face, once open and warm, was a mask of polite detachment. Then he dropped his bombshell, calmly stating he'd had an affair too, a reaction to my betrayal. The pain in his voice was a knife twisting in my gut. I needed to feel what it too, he said, and the simplicity of his words shattered any hope I had left. He told me he couldn't see a future for us anymore, that my betrayal had broken something irreplaceable. Hearing him say those words, the finality in his tone, was a devastation I wasn't prepared for. The man I loved, the life I took for granted, slipped through my fingers because of choices I made. When the divorce papers arrived, it was like signing the death certificate of our marriage. Each signature was an acknowledgement of my failure, the end of a chapter one wasn't ready to close. I tried reaching out to him, aiming for a semblance of friendship, or at least closure, but was met with a cold politeness that was worse than anger. It was the indifference of someone who had moved on, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of my decisions alone. This chapter of my life, marked by betrayal and loss, was closing, leaving me to ponder the ruins of a love that once promised forever. The realization of my actions, the depth of my self-deception, and the irrevocable damage done were lessons learned in the hardest way. My attempts to reconnect, to salvage anything from the ashes of our marriage, were met with the reality of a bond too broken to mend. The therapist's office became my weekly confession booth, a place where I could lay bare the tangle of mistakes and regrets without the fear of judgment. Sitting on that too comfortable couch, I spilled my guts, hoping to find a way to stitch them back together. It was my attempt to make sense of the chaos I created, to understand how I'd let myself get so lost. Word got back to me, through the grapevine of mutual friends, that he was seeing someone new. That news hit me like a truck. It wasn't just the fact that he was moving on, it was the realization that our split was real, final. No more what-ifs, just the cold, hard truth. I'd lost him, truly lost him, and there was no going back. Staring at myself in the mirror, I saw the consequences of my actions etched into my face. The pursuit of a fleeting passion had cost me everything that truly mattered. It was a hard pill to swallow, acknowledging that the damage was irreversible, that I was the architect of my own downfall. I threw myself into work, into self-improvement, into anything that might make me feel like I was moving forward, not just treading water in a sea of my own making. It was a desperate search for redemption, for some kind of sign that I wasn't entirely beyond saving. I tried to apologize to his family, to somehow make amends for the pain and upheaval I'd caused. But their polite, distant responses were a clear message. I was no longer one of them, no longer welcome in the circle I'd once considered my own. It was another blow, another reminder of all I'd thrown away. Then, at a mutual friends gathering, I saw him. Just a glimpse across the room was enough to send a wave of emotions crashing over me. Nostalgia, regret, love, it all swirled together, leaving me breathless. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The distance between us was palpable, a chasm too wide to bridge with mere words. So, I wrote him a letter. It was the most honest thing I'd ever written, a raw outpouring of everything I felt, everything I wished I could change. I told him I still loved him, that I was sorry, that I understood if he could never forgive me. It was my final attempt at reconciliation, a last-ditch effort to reach out across the void I'd created. Sending that letter was like setting a piece of my soul adrift. I didn't know if it would reach him, if he would read it, or if it would simply be cast aside, another casualty of the wreckage of our marriage. But I had to try, had to put those words out there, even if they were just a whisper in the wind. It was all I had left, the only way I knew how to say goodbye. In the dim light of my bedroom, the letter lay open, his words etched deep, not just on paper, but into the marrow of my bones. I wish you happiness, he wrote, a simple sentence that felt like the closing of a book I desperately wished had a different ending. It was his final goodbye, a gentle but firm severing of what once was. The finality of it left me hollow, a shell echoing with the remnants of our shared past. Days blurred into weeks, and the news hit me like a freight train: my husband was engaged. The reality of losing him forever crashed over me, a relentless tide of grief and acceptance. The ring he once slicked onto my finger, a symbol of our eternal bond, was now a painful reminder of what I'd squandered. I had to let go, not just of him, but of the life we had built together. Loneliness became my constant companion, a shadow that followed me into the light of new beginnings. In an attempt to escape its grasp, I reached out to friends I had neglected, seeking to weave myself back into the fabric of a social life I had once known. The warmth of rekindled friendships was a balm to my aching soul, a reminder that while some doors close, others remain open. The decision to sell the piece of jewelry my lover had given me wasn't easy. It was a tangible piece of my betrayal, a secret I had carried close to my heart. But as I handed it over, something within me shifted. The money I received went to a local charity, a symbolic gesture of trying to do good from the wrongs of my past. It felt like a step, however small, towards redemption. Venturing back into the world of dating felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Each date was a stark reminder of what I had lost, the depth of connection with my husband irreplaceable. Laughter felt forced, conversations shallow. The comparison was inevitable, each encounter leaving me more disillusioned than the last. The day of his wedding arrived, a day I had no right to be a part of but found myself drawn to like a moth to flame. Hidden in the shadows, I watched as he pledged his life to another, a moment so intimate yet so foreign. The joy on his face was a stark contrast to the ache in my heart. It was the closing of a chapter, the harsh reality of consequences born from my choices. As I stood there, a specter of the past, I realized the depth of my folly. My pursuit of a fleeting passion had cost me everything. The man I once called my husband, my best friend, was now a stranger promising forever to someone else. The finality of that moment was a stark reminder of the irrevocable loss my actions had caused. There was no redemption, no second chances, just the bitter taste